I hope everyone understands that you did watch the movie after the first listen of the album.
Yeah, well, I still get messages telling me, you've got to watch the movie, you've got to watch the movie, but I think anyone who's been following by now understands that yes, I have, and it's true, I did. After I listened, of course I did.
Anyway, interesting fact, the scene where Pink hurts his hand in the movie, that was not faked. The actor Bob Geldof did indeed cut his hand, but the movie director decided not to stop the recording. It was so
I see.
genuine.
Yeah, nice, genuine little bit of extra drama there.
And also the actress was not warned beforehand that Bob Geldof would throw a wine bottle and a food cart at her, which, by the way, just missed her for a few centimeters.
Well, as an actress, I'd be upset. As a film producer, I would feel like I got a real genuine reaction. One of my turns, well, one of his turns, right? I'm always reluctant to say, in all seriousness, that something is perfect. I do find myself using that word in the common, casual way sometimes, as a sort of expression of enthusiastic approval or liking, which, of course, tends to weaken our perception of the word, and I do try to shy away from that as much as possible, but it happens. But when I sit down to seriously consider, objectively, whether I would truly label something perfect, I find it nearly impossible to do. Because there's nearly always something that I find which could be improved. And I guess you've experienced this side of me at the beginning of my rock journey a bit, back when I was applying numeric grades to various elements of these pieces that I'm listening to. And actually, quite a few people were taken aback at my willingness and readiness to give a less than perfect score to some incredibly great music. Anyway, now here I am with this one of my turns. And as I have spent time with this song, I discovered more and more about it that is so incredibly good. And this thought began to creep into my mind, can I find any weaknesses in it? But it's more than just that. It's not just a lack of weak points, but an incredibly continuous perfection. This other level above. And I've personally come to the conclusion that were I to attempt to grade this piece of music, I would give it a perfect score on every level. It is exquisite. Everything about it, the instrumentation, the compositional design, the musical interpretation or delivery of the content by the performers, the execution of the technical elements, whether it's the pacing, the spacing, its communication of the message, and the cumulative effect of it all, the lyrics, everything that I am able to observe and assess is, from my vantage point, perfect. Both from the technical and the artistic emotional perspective. To me, it sits among those special musical gems which are not highly abundant, in which the creation and the presentation of the piece, the work of the composers, the work of the performers, and, in a recording, also the work of the producers, creates a special alchemy, a kind of magic in which the music that we experience feels flawless. And all of that here in such a short space of time. In fact, that is also part of it's magic. Not one single wasted note or less than perfect fraction of a second. Nothing to dilute this experience. I feel like I could explore this song for hours and still not reach the end of what it has to offer. But I have picked out some of the things that stand out to me as particularly special, or that I simply enjoyed and noticed. And that's what I want to share with you here now. Right from the very beginning, from the title itself, we can see a very important detail. Just as I noticed during my first listen, this is one of his turns. And I'm sure it's not one of two, but one of many. Meaning Pink is now, actually has been since some time now, set. His ideas are so well fixed, determined, that his outbursts have been manifesting themselves for some time now. Here in this song, as well as in the following three, we have the adult Pink, the mature one, the Pink who has made up his mind, who has arrived, and is acting or reacting according to who he really is. This song comes after Pink's last attempt to reconnect by a phone call. And this detail is worth noticing. But let's start by looking at the harmonic scheme of the music and a few other musical features, and then we'll dive into the other elements of the song. One of the things that comes out of this piece is an incredible, unchained power. And as you've heard me talk about quite often before, most commonly, a sense of strength, power, and compelling drive is created in music by contrasting the two great poles, the tonic, or the one chord on one hand, and the dominant, or the five chord on the other hand. Now, we're in the key of C here, so I'm going to demonstrate these two in that key right now. So the tonic, of course, is our key chord. That means that it's going to be in the key of C, the C chord, C, E, G. And so I can play. This is our tonic. This is home. This is the place that the music sits. But the dominant is the chord 5 notes above. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we build our chord. G, B, D. That's our G chord. And so in the key of C, the 5 chord is the G chord. And these two opposing chords, or counterbalancing chords, C and G, you set them against each other, they can work kind of as partners, but also as antagonists. And so we end up with this pull towards, this is home, but we end up with this pull towards the other. This both pulls us away and drives us back home. It's the feeling of, at the end of a piece, the end. And so it gives a sense of finality and stability. Because practically speaking, these two chords and the tonal centers they represent are the most powerful, we could say, locators within the tonic framework. You can think of it like the points at each end of a line segment, or the north and south poles on our planet. Their stability and their power orient us, and we could say act as a sort of governing force in the music. The more strongly these 2 points within the tonality are featured, the more the rest of the chords, harmonies, musical elements, will follow their lead. We could even say submit to them. They have the ability, these 2 chords, to shape the music simply by entering the room for a moment. There's a certain feeling of security and order which they impose. Now, a piece of music doesn't have to feature these two chords against each other. Of course, there are myriad other ways to establish tonality than this. But on the other hand, it's quite difficult to come up with the same feeling of strength and power without having these both working together. For example, if we remove, say, the 5 chord from our tonal palette, we tend to come up with softer, gentler, and more mellow harmonic qualities. A common one is using the 4 against 1, like this. Here's 1 again. You can hear it. This would be 5, which we are going to avoid now. Here's 1, and here's 4. And then back to 1. It's gentler. Instead of feeling like we have a powerful, assertive the end, we have more of a lift, float, and settle down gently. It's a very popular progression, and depending on the context, it can give us a smooth, soothing quality, or a feeling of lift, a gentleness. We still feel well-oriented, but not so deeply anchored. And since we don't have such a deep anchor to pull against musically, that is why we tend to end up with the gentler feeling. There isn't such a strong antagonistic personality competing with the 1 chord. We don't get the combative battle sensation, which the 5 chord can provide. But looking at the chords underlying this song, one of my turns, we find a bit of a surprise. Because for such a violent, combative piece of music, at least in the last portion of it, there's hardly a 5 chord in sight. And let's walk through it together. We're going to look at this music on the page, and I don't want to lose those of you who don't read music. So I'm not going to make it incredibly technical, but at the same time, we will look at the music, and even if you don't read music, I think you will be able to follow some of what is happening here. So, we start in the key of C. This is our C chord right here. And remember that according to what we just laid out, when we see a C chord, that is 1. When we see a 5 chord, that would be our G chord. I'll just write the names beside. 1 is C, 5 is G. F is going to be the 4 chord. So that helps us just as we're going through this. And nicely enough, the chords are already written out on this score. So you can look through them as we're going through here and you'll see. All right, here's an F chord. Going on, here's a C chord. F, C. We're looking, we have some minors. Here's another F chord. All right, here's our first G. Actually, it's a G7. We'll put a star beside that because that's our first dominant, the first 5 we've come across. And then we're back to C. Moving on to the next page. You can see that we have Fs, Cs, some minors here. F. All right, here's one more G right in this moment. Give it a special star. And then, of course, we transition to the next episode. This is where things go crazy, where the music turns from this contemplative, reflective, somewhat sober, melancholy quality to he's gone crazy. He's cracked. This happens right at that moment. And our key changes. So now we have to think about what is our 1, 4, and 5 chord all over again. Well, now we are now in the key of B flat. And so B flat is our 1 chord. And E flat is our 4 chord. F would be our 5 chord. And again, if we look through here, that's our 4. Here's our 1. We have a minor. We have a 4 chord. You see, as we're going through here, 4, 1, one of the minor chords. I'm not going to get into the technical minor stuff because I want to keep this focused. There's our 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, a minor, 4, a minor. We haven't seen a 5 chord yet. And in fact, now we have arrived at the guitar solo. I'm going to skip past this for the moment. We will come back to this in a few minutes. So, jumping ahead to where the voice returns, we find ourselves with another 4 chord. And then the music comes to an end fairly quickly, ending on a G minor. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. Actually, maybe I'll talk about it right now. What has happened is we have kind of transitioned to a different key again. B flat is our major, and I can show you here. We have B flat with our 1 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 1. And in this song, in this very crazed, chaotic, violent section, we have the 1 and the 4. We never saw the 5. It's really incredible. And still the music achieves this crazed power. However, when we come to the end, we end up a few notes lower on what we call the relative minor. And that's going to be G minor, G, B flat, D. And that's the key in which we end. So we've gone from C major at the beginning, then we transitioned through B flat, and now we have moved to end on G minor. Obviously, listening to the song, we travel through 3 distinct portions of it, and I will explore details about those in a few minutes. But it's worth noticing that not only is the dominant 5 chord very scarce throughout the entire song, but as we just saw, it simply doesn't exist at all in the final unhinged portion. Again, I'm accepting the guitar solo moment because I want to handle that separately. So here we have a violent, rather primal, crazed power in the music, but without the deep anchoring effect of the dominant. Rather, with the lifting quality of the 4. And I find this both fascinating and appropriate. Fascinating because it's an example of what I assume is not particularly common, which is we could say, popular song, achieving this incredible, impactful force without using the dominant. Of course, in a larger piece of music, let's say something classical, something more harmonically developed, you can do all kinds of things with the harmonies, and you don't have to follow the basic conventions so much because you have more room to work. But here we have this short song, and it achieves so much without this dominant being a significant feature. And it's appropriate because this song represents a person who has no anchor, who loses all his self-governing ability. And even though the music is violent enough to communicate that, I feel like its avoidance of the 5 subtly aids this feeling of suspension without stability, without an anchor. Another little element that stuck out to me a couple places in this song, in this contemplative section, is how the accompaniment has this sort of walking up and walking down, da da dum, da da dum, or da da dum, which hints towards 2 other parts of this musical work. One is the very final song, Outside the Wall. If you listen to that, you hear some of the same walking interjections in the instrumentation. But also, if we go back to Mother and we listen to the bass in Mother, we hear again this walking up, walking down, stepwise movement. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Now let's look at the guitar solo on its own. And the first thing we see is that just before the guitar solo, we had a D minor chord. Now, when the guitar enters, right here, it becomes D major by simply going from DFA to D F sharp A. And that is how this solo begins. Now, if we look at the chord that comes next, it's G. And very commonly, we might think, all right, we've been in the key of C. G was our 5 chord. So probably we've moved to the key of G now. And in that case, D would be the 5 of G. Let's look at this. I've written out the alphabet here to make it easy to look at. C is here. We were in C. G was our 5. Easy. Suppose now that we are living in 5 for a little bit as a sort of contrast. That's a very common thing that happens in the middle section of a song. And in that case, 5 up from G would be D. And in that case, this D would be the 5 of G. Meaning that we are now hearing a 5 to a 1. And you see how it feels like the end. The end. It has that assertive feel to it. But if we look closer, as I said, our last chord was D minor. Now we've started in D major. And if we treat D as our 1, and let's switch to a different color here so that we can look at this very clearly. D is 1, and we can confirm this, reinforce this assertion by seeing that D is in the bass all the way through this section. D is kind of functioning as home here, which means if D is 1, then G is 4. And so we have this sensation of being in D and then going to the 4. And then what comes next is a C. Well, remember we started in the key of C, but now we have G in the bass. And so when we hear the C, it sounds like another 4. So in this portion of the guitar solo, instead of having a sequence of powerful progressions, 5 to 1, 5 to 1, and then 5, it doesn't do what we expect it to do if we try to approach it that way. It is instead a series of 4 to 1, and then this becomes 1, and we hear 4 to 1 again, and it has that continuing sequence of gentle suspension, gently setting down, and that becomes gentle suspension, gently setting down. That means that throughout this entire second portion, including the guitar solo, we have no 5 chord. Really an incredible thing to notice, considering how violent and combative and how much energy is contained in this section without the 5 chord contributing at all. It's fascinating to me as a musician, and I hope that the rest of you can appreciate how this structural, harmonic, technical element plays into the whole effect of the music. Other musical features which stand out to me as being especially worthy of notice in this song. One is the vocal skill, the singer. His delivery of this music is, I could say, flawless. Meaning, every little shade of tonal coloring, his pacing, the opening, which sounds almost recitative style. It's more spoken than sung. And then, of course, the way he changes and shifts as the music and emotional needs of the music change and shift as well. It's incredible. And then, of course, as we just looked at the guitar solo harmonically, there's also the fact that this guitar solo does a fabulous job of creating this sense of complete breakdown and destruction and mental collapse, and expresses it out into the room for us. It's really fabulous. Now, going back to the song and its structure, let's go through each section of it and dig a bit more into the different elements of the song that all play a part. We have 3 parts in this song. Musically, part 1 is separated from the previous song, not only because the music doesn't continue unbroken from one to another, meaning the music in Young Lust comes to an end even before that song is over. We hear the telephone at the end. But also because this first part of One of My Turns is a monologue and not even Pink speaking. How should I say? Sound-wise, though, there is a continuation, a seamless transition. Maybe not musical, but it's still done with sound. Because One of My Turns starts with the dead phone call, the dial tone after his wife's lover hangs up. And this is a key to understanding One of My Turns. Here's kind of how it goes. As the beep sound fades away, we hear the voice of this dirty woman coming in. They, meaning Pink and this woman, are now in his hotel room. And this is, I think, the only occasion in this album where we hear another real person talking. Meaning, not a character inside Pink's mind, but outside of Pink. Except for the scenes from the movie that he's watching. Actually, the first 55 seconds of this 3.5-minute song are dedicated to this girl's remarks. Over a quarter of the song. Well, again, this is quite important. So let's look at what she's saying and we'll start putting things together. First thing we hear after this dead phone call. "Oh my God, what a fabulous room. Are all these your guitars?" And she goes on and on. "This place is bigger than our apartment. Oh wow, look at this tub. Want to take a bath?" And we start to notice a common denominator. Room, guitars, apartment, tub, things. She is herself. She's in her element. Just the same as we saw from her very first interaction with Pink. Right at the beginning, in the movie, she's wandering around Pink's room, gawking at the luxury around her, somehow mirroring the theme in What Shall We Do Now? It's this love for materialism, which is a common denominator among the people who end up as bricks in this wall. And of course, this culminates with her sexual approach towards him while the song starts rolling and we hear, "Day after day, love turns gray, like the skin on a dying man. And night after night, we pretend it's all right. But I have grown older, and you have grown colder, and nothing is very much fun anymore." At this point, we need to remember that Pink considers himself betrayed by both significant female figures in his life, his mother and his wife. And now, in this one of my turns, we have a representation of them, especially of his wife. And the point being made is that from Pink's perspective, they do not understand him. They do not understand his needs. They respond in a wrong way to what he needs. Pink is a lonely person who needs love and affection, a person who is on the brink of despair. But the female figure here, which is functioning as a symbolic figure, only offers him sex, flesh, carnal, material things. Looking at the lyrics, "Day after day, love turns gray," we understand that this entire scene is nothing but a summary of the entire story of him and his wife. Obviously, he didn't spend day after day, night after night with this girl, but only with his wife. So this girl represents his wife and the way she related to Pink, or at least the way he perceived and understood her approach to him over a long period of time. He was looking for something deep, but he felt that she only offered something shallow. So obviously, it's all her fault, right? But at the same time, notice that Pink is not only quiet and distant, but he behaves as if the girl does not exist, as if she is not even there. Is this a hint to what we noticed early in the album in Mother? Remember the frigidity of the adult Pink who tries to escape his half-naked wife who is offering herself to him. As we noticed back then, all of his wife's efforts toward him were sexual in nature, were having some sexual element in them, while his desires toward her were more, we could say, spiritual in nature, as he was reaching for a love-based relationship, which in Pink's mind is far above sex. When he was reaching out for this in the movie, she was turning herself on the other side. Now remember, this is all Pink's perception. But this is exactly what happens here. Pink reached out to this girl first by going out of his cabin and inviting her by looking at her and then accepting her into his hotel room. He was reaching out, not for sex, but for a deeper relationship. Because even now, in all his brokenness and confusion, he still craves true love and real connection. Again, this entire scene with this girl is nothing but a reminder of what really happened day after day, night after night, in his relationship with his wife. The girl offered him sex just like his wife. And now we come to the point of all of this. Pink is losing it. He's going crazy. Not only in this particular scene in one of my turns, but overall, it's a continuous downward spiral which we see developing, almost feeling as we're watching it in real time. But why? Why does he go crazy? Why does he decide to separate himself from the rest of the world? Why does he build the wall? Why does he conclude that I don't need no arms around me? Well, here. Because the arms he longed for didn't understand the real, deep need at the core of his being. And as a consequence, I can feel one of my turns coming on. I feel cold as a razor blade, tight as a tourniquet, dry as a funeral drum. That's why he feels cold, tight, and dry. That's why he has these turns, an explosion. But not before Pink sheds a tear. Did you notice that in the movie? One of the things that you might notice in the musical quality also is this feeling of sobbing. And we hear it in the next section, in section 2, which we'll get to in a moment. The only music we hear in section 1 are these ominous atonal drones behind the voices, the girl's voice and the TV. And the girl's awe at Pink's possessions and environment not only tell us about her mindset, but also tell us about how Pink has attempted to fill his empty spaces with materialism. Because he has everything now. Another thing to notice that was playing on the TV in the film is an old movie called The Dam Busters. Turns out it's a 1955 war movie based on a true story and focusing on the efforts to destroy German dams in World War II. So it's alluding to Pink's father, to the feeling of deep loss that separates him from any intimate relationship, whether parental, societal, romantic, or otherwise. And ironically contrasting the breakdown of walls, busting dams, with the buildup of Pink's wall. Also, this outburst, if you think in the long term through the course of this album, this outburst is kind of the culmination, the breaking point, which we follow through the next songs, ends up with the trial, and, in a strange way, might actually be the thing that finally spurred his exit from the wall, the destruction of his wall. So it's an interesting thing to think about, Dam Busters and Pink's wall, and how it all ties together here. Now, as we get to the end of this section, we come to the transition, which is hardly a transition, to part 2. The girl's last question, "Are you feeling okay?" is immediately answered by Pink's thoughts. It does two things at once. It's kind of like cutting to a different scene in a movie, showing us what's really going on in his mind as this girl is wandering around her room, and that he's really not okay. But it also feels a bit like he was just waiting for her to ask the question, as a sort of permission to go down this road, to essentially unload his soul on her. And that is how we end up in part 2. day after day, love turns gray. And as we progress through this section, you hear him say, and I can feel one of my turns coming on. And then after that, I feel cold as a razor blade. That blank spot, I feel. It fills the space of where can was in the previous phrase. It's fabulous. It's, again, I don't want to throw out too many superlatives carelessly, but I feel like saying this is a moment of genius in the musical structural design, because what it does is it ties the two together, at the same time allows it to go on to the next phrase, cold as a razor blade and so forth, and at the same time it highlights this sense of a quick catch in the throat effect, a sort of a sobbing feel. And there is that undertone in this portion of the music, which I think is the reason, or at least goes well with what we see in the movie, with that little tear trickling down at the end of this section. Here is highlighted what we found in Young Lust, that Pink conflates this girl with his wife. That's what we find in this section. And perhaps even lumps all femininity together with it, and essentially the entire world. Even here, after recognizing that he's lost his wife and the love connection that should exist, Pink is blind. Is it by choice? By accident? By incapability? Regardless, he does not see his own accountability. And instead, just as with everything else, he views the very thing that should have been his salvation, love, connection, as yet one more betrayal. Love turns gray like the skin on a dying man. It is one more unavoidable brick. And here is where, in this section, we hear that walking up and down in the accompaniment. Dum, bum, 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 bum. Which, if you go back and listen to the thin ice, to the bass in the thin ice, you hear that same walking up, walking down. Here it's a bit higher, more in the treble range, and thus gives a bit tighter, high-strung feel to it, which again suits the context and the moment in the music, in the whole story. Lyrically, take note of the razor blade, the tourniquet, and the funeral drum, sending us to violence, drugs, death, which kind of foreshadows the coming phases in the album. His turn to violence and fascism, his use of drugs in Comfortably Numb, and finally his complete death as a person sealed behind his own wall, which we find in Waiting for the Worms. And then the final three notes of this section walk us up to the precipice of section 3. And there's a sudden synthesized crescendo, very rapid, which is a bit like Pink's mental state. It creates the impression of one reaching the breaking point. The music has been carrying on contemplatively, and then, like the final straw which broke the camel's back, suddenly he reaches the limit, and the music leaps into B flat major. Wait, what? B flat major? Hold on. We were in C. C is here. And we already talked about common places to go. Maybe the dominant, G, or the relative minor, could be A minor. Those are common places to go. From C to B flat, that's an unusual shift. And especially if we went G, A, B, now to B flat. That's a sort of darkening, ominous shift. We were here again. And then we walk up. And now we're here. You can hear it just by the chords behind the music. And everything suddenly pours out with incredible violence. Thus, we find ourselves in part 3. But this explosion towards the girl is again nothing but a representation of his wild desire to take revenge. Obviously, he's aiming at her with the bottle of wine, with the food tray, which is, just as I said in the previous in-depth, a very young lust revenge. But it's not targeting this woman specifically. Yes, it is his desire to make his point once and for all to this woman, but not only. She stands for all women and by extension, the entire world. And then, run to the bedroom. There you'll find my favorite axe. Wait, that's a bit terrifying. Meaning what? A guitar? Or a deadly tool? And then, of course, Vlad asked me the question, does this have anything to do with careful with the axe, Eugene? And he looked at me saying, of course, you don't know that yet. So I will leave that to you to decide. But he's so self-involved by this point. Did he even realize what he said? This girl, who's obviously not a musician, won't know what he means if he does mean guitar. It's a double entendre. It highlights the fine line between artistry and insanity, between passion for art, for music, for self-expression, communication, connection. Essentially, life. And the wall. Alienation, isolation, suppression and repression, destruction, ending in death. This word, axe, it's the dividing line between the two that is shockingly blurred. Is he, in the midst of his deranged outburst, telling the girl to go check out his most beloved instrument? Or does the fact that it's his favorite axe mean that he's been through this all before? Because it's one of his many turns. And he has already a chosen, favorite, murderous weapon on hand just for these times. This fine line encapsulates the entire album and is summed up with atomic energy in this one small word. A little side note, in my research about this song, I discovered that the original phrase was, "You'll find my felling axe," which pushes us to the more violent meaning. Because you can't treat that as a double entendre. You really can't take it as meaning a musical instrument. I think favorite axe is by far the better choice for this song and is one of the things that contributes to its perfection. And then his frenetic questions mirror the girl's questions from part 1. So this is Pink's sarcasm. Is this what you want from me? Well then here. The girl, earlier. What are you watching? Pink, now. Would you like to watch the TV? Throwing the TV. The girl, want to take a bath? Pink. Or get between the sheets? The girl, are you feeling okay? Pink. Or contemplate the silent freeway? The girl, can I get a drink of water? Pink. Would you like something to eat? And throws the entire tray at her. The girl. You want some, huh? Pink. Would you like to learn to fly? Notice that just as in part 2, where he frames everything in such a way that it must be his wife's fault, so here, his ferocious sarcasm attacks the girl and pins all responsibility on her. And she's such a naive, clueless personality. It's an incredibly rich layering of ideas here. Particularly noticeable to me is Pink's obsession with flying. He's offering to teach the girl how to fly. And the bitter irony distilled in that line takes us back to, Mama won't let you fly, but she might let you sing. And other than the axe, and in fact, because of the axe, we have this wonderfully saturated poetic moment, encapsulating everything from mother to his rock star career to his imprisonment behind his wall, the axe, the guitar, the pinioned bird, his father's death, the plains, and blame, oppression, and death. It's an incredibly densely loaded moment, all contained within a few words which normally would communicate freedom and boundless opportunity. And all of these, while Pink is destroying everything in the room, throwing all that he can get into his hand towards her in a sort of, is this what you want? Well, here. It's revengeful, violent, while at the same time, he's pointing towards her, his wife, as the one who drove him so crazy. And then the girl somehow disappears from the scene, if we're looking at the movie. And we imagine she's running away if we're listening to the song without the movie. And we hear at the end, Pink ends up crying, "Why are you running away?" There's no awareness or acknowledgement of his own part in creating this life of horror. It's a powerful moment. Both the context and the voice make it sound both sincere and cynical, sarcastic. He's completely unsurprised that this effort, his effort at connection here, has also failed. He expected it to. He expected it to end this way. And of course he is not to blame, meaning the fault lies somewhere else. And yet, we hear the incredibly genuine despair in his voice. It's a bit of a prelude to "Don't Leave Me Now" and the horror and dread of being left alone. In the movie, it's interesting to notice that the things he sets about to destroy are all reflective surfaces, things in which Pink is forced to see himself. And even though the song is framed as him venting at the girl and, by extension, the entire world outside of himself, what we actually find is that Pink is, at his core, wanting to destroy his ability to see himself. He's unwilling to face who he is now and who he is becoming. This is the cause of his breakdown. He's losing touch with reality because he's losing touch with himself. And this causes the final crazed scream, "Why are you running away?" to encompass his own running from the truth as well. One more little note about the harmonies in the music. This "Why are you running away" ends on a G minor chord. But you'll notice that his voice is on A. It's an unrelated note. We have G minor with A. And it's interesting because just recently I did an episode on the Beatles series talking about the 6th chord, where you have, I think it was even a G chord with the 6. Maybe it wasn't a G, but it's essentially the same. Now here we have a minor with the same 6 added. That's an added 6. But now now the minor darkens it. And this is the chord underpinning his scream. Why are you running away? But he's here, singing it, as if there is no harmony, no peace. Everything is dissonant in his experience, in his life. Even the question itself is dissonant. The entire movie scene ends up with Pink hanging out of his broken window, bleeding and screaming, "Next time!" Well, I've never said that word in my life. It's not happening now.
It's okay.
Blaming everybody for his tragedy and declaring war to the entire world, while the world itself hasn't the slightest idea that he even exists. You see it in the movie, where the whole city is going on, unaware that he's even there. This song is a kind of, that's how I got here and that's how I feel about it summary. I am going crazy. I am losing my mind. I am left alone, abandoned, and it is everybody's fault, especially the closest ones to me, but certainly not mine. And I will have my revenge. But, of course, when we indulge ourselves in this way, vengefully attempt to inflict pain on others, it only results in hurting ourselves. I'll see you next time.
So are you going to add one of my turns to your list with perfect songs?
Oh, it's there already.
Is there?
That's how I perceive it.
Is it long? The list?
Well, I guess I don't have an actual tallied list, so I wouldn't say that I could measure it, but it's not extremely long because perfect songs have to be perfect.
Maybe we'll talk about it sometime.